For more perspective, I'm now joined by two guests, Valentin Yakushik, Professor at the Department of International Relations and Social Sciences at the National University of Life and Environmental Sciences in Ukraine, and Daniel Hawkins, a freelance correspondent based in Moscow. Gentlemen, thank you very much for joining me. Valentin, I'll start with you first. Now, you've currently evacuated from Kyiv, but you're also still lecturing remotely, despite many of your students being dispersed by the evacuations. Can you just tell us a little bit about how you evacuated, whether you used one of these humanitarian corridors, and perhaps some of the experiences that some of your students had as well?
Well, we restarted teaching a week ago. Students are dispersed. Some are in the army. So approximately 1/3 of students attend classes online, and I'm happy with this, as my colleagues. I was intending to stay in Kyiv, but I felt that there is a big danger because, first of all, there may be no internet, no electricity, and I cannot do my work, academic, or what I do with you and other TV channels. So we took the train from Kyiv to Uzhhorod, the western city near the border with Hungary and Slovak Republic. By the way, Ukrainian authorities give for free chance to go by train to Lviv, to Uzhhorod, to other places. So there is care about those who want to emigrate. Kyiv is a city. Majority of its population has left it because there is a danger of the city being encircled by the Russian forces, and that they can establish a blockade, even though Ukrainian military think that this encirclement will not take place. Ukrainian army is fighting as heroes, and they do not want to let foreign country to enter in the capital. The battles are very severe now in the east of Ukraine. Definitely the port of Mariupol will be lost very soon. Russian army is much stronger than Ukrainian there, and there will be more movement in the east, and a lot of Russian troops, and a lot of civilians are moving towards the west, and more than 3.5 million of Ukrainians left Ukraine already. They are in European countries. By the way, they are very well accepted there. They are given free food, free travel in the European Union. So there is solidarity with those who leave Ukraine, who have to leave it because of the war.
Right. Now, the Russian military, Daniel, this question's to you, earlier this month announced the creation of safe routes to allow Ukrainians to flee cities like Kharkiv, Mariupol and Kyiv. Now, Ukrainian government and NGO leaders are accusing Russian forces of shelling humanitarian corridors, laying landmines along them and generally disrupting the safe passage of aid workers and medical supplies. Is this the case? How does Russia deem these corridors safe, if so?
Well, thanks for having me. I mean, certainly it's a positive step that humanitarian corridors are being organized. It took the Russian-Ukrainian negotiators around a week up until the 3rd of March before any corridors at all were agreed. So certainly the fact that today we're seeing over the last 24 hours, Russia agreeing 10 corridors, Ukraine offering another potentially 11 humanitarian corridors out. So it's good the signs are talking. We are seeing allegations and counter-allegations, of course, from both sides here. You quite rightly say the Ukrainian army, the Ukrainian officials have accused the Russian army of breaching those corridors, of shelling and of mining. The Russian side, of course, would deny that. They've accused the Ukrainian army of taking advantage effectively of these ceasefires, of these corridors, to effectively strengthen their position, to reposition their military assets. And of course, most notably of concern, the far-right military elements as part of Ukraine's National Guard. We're talking about the Azov Battalion, the Idol Battalion, and other far-right paramilitary groups, of effectively holding people hostage, of not letting them out of certain areas. And Mariupol is one such city.
We've just had direct reports. We've just had direct reports from our reporter on the ground saying that aid is not getting into these embattled cities. What do you say to that?
Well, the Russian Ministry of Defense is saying they are bringing aid in. We have seen hundreds of tons of humanitarian aid come into the areas of Donetsk and Lugansk, and Mariupol, of course, is in the Donetsk Oblast. So Russia is delivering aid. We've seen documented evidence of that, the most basic supplies. Of course, any deliveries either by Russia or by international organizations are going to face difficulties because of fighting, and any breaches of corridors will have to be investigated by appropriate international authorities.
Now, experts familiar with Russia's use of such corridors in Syria and those observing their implementation of it in Ukraine today say that Moscow is only using them as a deceitful accessory with the aim of gaining ground in its war against Ukraine. What do you say to that?
As I say, we are going to see in this fog of war, in the confusion of war, allegations and counter-allegations. We've seen them from both sides, and the Russian Defense Ministry is adamant.
It's not just allegations, though. It's direct observations of strategies that were used in wars previously by Russia, and that strategy used again.
I mean, clearly any such allegation is going to have to be investigated by appropriate international authorities. The message coming from the Russian side, as I say, is very different, that they are bringing in humanitarian aid and they are letting people out. Indeed, just in the last few days, we've seen around 11,000 people evacuated from Donetsk and Lugansk republics to safety, and that has been documented as well. No doubt breaches are going to occur in the confusion and the terror of war, but people are being allowed out and are being provided humanitarian assistance.
Now, Valentin, we've heard from Daniel there. It's quite difficult to assess, how things are playing out on the ground when you're not actually in Ukraine. Certainly for those who are observing it from afar, it's quite difficult to understand what's actually going on. How do we ensure that there is safe passage for these people who are becoming more and more displaced along these corridors? And how do we get aid into the people? What do the people in Ukraine need most right now?
Let me tell from on two levels about the humanitarian corridors. One is my personal experience with my relatives who have lived in the town of Gostomel, which was one of the first which was occupied by Russian forces. It's an area near the airport of Gostomel, several kilometers to the north of Kyiv. My relatives lived there in a shelter under their house for 2 weeks, and they were not able to leave that place, even though Russia several times declared humanitarian corridors, once to Belarus, and it was not possible because local forces, Russian forces, didn't know anything about it, and they were shooting if somebody would sit in his car and go in the direction of Belarus. Then there was corridor open to Kyiv, and with very big difficulties, people managed to go through. After that, what followed, there were house-to-house searches there. They broke windows, doors. First it was search, later looting started. Now, in the house, in the apartment which I bought in the house in Gostomel, street Chernynskaya 52 house. I say it specially for Russian Minister of Defense, who is saying for Mr. Shoigu, General Shoigu, that Russian troops came to save us, Ukrainians, for some awful persons. Now there are wild soldiers there. I understand when they do search of house to house, but when they start looting, when they take everything from the houses, from my house, they took motorcycle, other things, and of the neighbor, they blown his garage and took a car out of there. Can Russian embassy, if it watches this, report to military to make a case study of that? It's a very small thing, but if President Stalin in the Soviet Union was giving an order to shoot anybody who is looting, why Russian army is doing that? And my request is also, maybe China, maybe Chinese government can influence Russians and maybe sending Chinese and other international observers to the places which are so-called liberated, occupied by Russia. Looting is undermining any kind of good relations between two nations. I wonder if Russian soldiers were doing the same in Abkhazia, in Ossetia. I don't think they were doing. Why they do it to Ukrainians? It's a strange war if we take into account what President Putin is saying, that we are one nation. What kind of attitude should be if there is one nation, how you should protect property, and why do you destroy industrial sites? Well, I understand sometimes soldiers are defending on these industrial sites, but there should be some kind of agreement not to conduct warfare in the places which are necessary for the future of Ukrainian economy. Yeah. Sorry that I take this case study, but it can be as an example, because other things are much worse than that. This kind of destroying of Ukrainian infrastructures should be stopped.
Okay, Valentin, I'm so sorry to cut you off there, and I know it's a very stressful conversation with many, many angles to discuss, but we don't have enough time for this conversation to go any further. Appreciate your time, gentlemen. Valentin Yakushik and Daniel Hawkins there.